My dear friends, please sit with me for a moment. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. Take a deep breath. Can you feel that? That gentle rise and fall of your chest? That quiet rhythm that has been with you for decades now? Through every joy, every sorrow, every moment of wonder and uncertainty? I want to share something with you today that may change everything you thought you knew about what happens when that breath finally stops. Something that, after 43 years as a Buddhist monk, still fills me with both profound awe and, yes, a certain kind of frightening beauty. But please, don't let that word frighten you away. Sometimes the most important truths are the ones that initially unsettle us, like looking directly into the morning sun after spending too long in darkness. You know, I've noticed something in my years of speaking with people your age, people who have lived rich, full lives, raised families, built careers, weathered storms. There's a question that whispers itself in the quiet moments, isn't there? Maybe when you're lying in bed at night, or when you're sitting in your garden watching the seasons change, or when you receive news that another old friend has passed on. The question comes softly, persistently. What really happens when I die? Have you felt this wondering? This mixture of curiosity and concern that seems to grow stronger as the years pass. You're not alone in this. In fact, you're participating in one of humanity's oldest and most sacred inquiries. And today, I want to walk with you through what Buddhist teachings reveal about this great transition, not to frighten you, but to offer you something far more valuable than comfort alone. I want to offer you understanding. But first, let me tell you why this matters so much to me personally, and why I believe it will matter to you. 3 winters ago, I was sitting beside the bed of my teacher, Venerable Thich Haitian, not the famous monk you may know, but my own teacher who shared the same name. He was 91 years old, his body frail as autumn leaves, but his eyes, his eyes were luminous with something I had never seen before. As he lay dying, he turned to me and whispered something that shook me to my core. "My dear student," he said, his voice barely audible, "I need to tell you what I'm seeing now. The frightening thing, it's not what we expected." In that moment, I thought he might be speaking of pain, of fear, of some terrible vision. But what he shared with me in his final hours was something else entirely. Something that revealed the deepest truth about death, according to Buddhist understanding, and something that, I believe, every person deserves to know before their own time comes. Would you like to know what he told me? Would you like to understand what makes this revelation both frightening and ultimately liberating? Then stay with me, because what I'm about to share may transform not just how you think about dying, but how you choose to live each precious day you have remaining. You see, my friends, most of us approach the subject of death like travelers preparing for a journey to a completely unknown destination. We pack our bags with hopes and fears, with religious beliefs we've inherited, or philosophical ideas we've adopted, but we've never actually spoken to anyone who has made the trip and returned to tell us what they found. Buddhism, however, offers us something different. It offers us a map. But here's what my teacher showed me that winter evening, and what I want to share with you now. The map is not quite what we've been told it would be. The frightening truth is not that death leads to punishment or annihilation, as some traditions suggest, nor is it that death leads immediately to some peaceful, eternal rest. The frightening truth is far more complex, and ultimately, far more empowering than either of those possibilities. Let me ask you something, and please really consider this as we sit together. Have you ever experienced a dream so vivid, so real, that when you woke up you were disoriented, unsure for a moment which reality was true? Have you ever had the experience of being completely absorbed in a memory, perhaps remembering your wedding day, or the birth of your child, or a moment of great loss, and finding that for those moments, the past felt more real than the present moment you were sitting in? This is important because it helps us understand what Buddhist teachings tell us about consciousness itself. You see, what we call life and what we call death are not as different as we imagine them to be. They are both states of consciousness, both ways that awareness experiences itself. And here's where it gets both frightening and wonderful. Consciousness, according to Buddhist understanding, is far more creative and powerful than most of us realize. When my teacher was dying, he described to me what he was beginning to perceive. He said it was like being in a vast theater where he was simultaneously the audience, the actor, and the playwright. "I am creating what I'm experiencing," he whispered, "but I am also being created by it. Do you understand?" The frightening thing is how much power we have and how little we've prepared to use it wisely. Now, I want to pause here and ask you to breathe with me again. I know this might sound abstract, even unsettling, but stay with me, because what I'm describing has profound practical implications for your life right now, today, in whatever circumstances you find yourself. Buddhist teachings tell us that what we call death is actually a process of transformation, much like what happens when you fall asleep and begin to dream. But unlike the dreams you experience each night, the consciousness that continues after physical death has been shaped by something much more significant than just one day's experiences. It has been shaped by an entire lifetime, your lifetime, of thoughts, intentions, actions, and the deep patterns of how you've related to yourself and others. Have you ever noticed how certain thoughts or emotional patterns seem to arise in your mind automatically, without your conscious choosing? Perhaps you find yourself worrying about your health or your family's future, even when everything is actually fine in the present moment. Or maybe you catch yourself being critical of others or of yourself in ways that don't really serve anyone. These aren't character flaws. They're simply mental habits, patterns that your consciousness has developed over time. Now, here's what my teacher helped me understand that night, and what makes this both frightening and ultimately liberating. These patterns don't simply disappear when the body dies. In fact, in some ways, they become more powerful, more defining of your experience. Without the anchor of physical sensation, without the daily routines and social interactions that normally structure your awareness, consciousness becomes like a river without banks, flowing entirely according to the currents that have been carved by your lifetime of thoughts and choices. Let me share with you a story that illustrates this beautifully. There was once an old woman in my village in Vietnam. We called her Grandmother Lily, who spent the last 20 years of her life consumed with worry. She worried about her health, about money, about whether her children visited enough, about the changing world around her. She was not a bad person. In fact, she was quite generous and kind when her anxiety wasn't overwhelming her. But worry had become her default state of mind, the lens through which she perceived everything. When Grandmother Lily was dying, she called me to her bedside. She was terrified, but not of pain or of losing her loved ones. She was terrified because, she said, her mind had become like a frightened bird, trapped in a cage of her own making. "I don't know how to stop worrying," she told me. "What if I carry this worry with me wherever I'm going?" Her question pierced straight to the heart of what Buddhist teachings reveal about death and what comes after. You see, according to Buddhist understanding, consciousness after death is not subjected to external judgment or punishment. There is no cosmic court where your deeds are weighed by someone else's standards. Instead, consciousness experiences itself according to its own nature, according to the patterns it has cultivated. This is both the frightening and the liberating truth. We are, in a very real sense, creating our own experience of death and what follows, just as we create our own experience of life right now. The question is, what are we creating? What patterns are we strengthening? What kind of consciousness are we cultivating? I want to take a moment here to address something I know many of you might be thinking, but I'm in my 60s, 70s, 80s. Isn't it too late to change these patterns? Haven't I already determined what my experience will be? My dear friends, This is one of the most beautiful aspects of Buddhist understanding. It is never too late. Never. The consciousness that you are is not fixed, not set in stone. Every moment offers an opportunity for transformation. Every breath is a chance to cultivate wisdom, compassion, and peace. And here's something particularly meaningful for those of you in the later chapters of life. In some ways, you are better positioned now than you've ever been to do this essential work. Think about it. You have perspective now that you couldn't have had at 20 or 30 or even 50. You've seen how many of the things you once worried about never came to pass or turned out to be less significant than you feared. You've experienced loss and discovered that you could survive it, even find meaning in it. You've had the opportunity to see patterns in your own behavior, your own thinking, that might have been invisible to you when you were busier with the immediate demands of career and young family. This is not about becoming perfect or achieving some impossible standard of spiritual purity. Buddhist teachings are not about perfection. They're about understanding and compassion, beginning with understanding and compassion for yourself. Let me tell you about what happened with Grandmother Lily, because her story illustrates something profound about the possibility of transformation, even in the final stages of life. After she shared her fear with me about carrying her worry into death, I asked her if she would be willing to try a simple practice with me. She agreed. I taught her to notice when the worry arose in her mind, and instead of fighting it or judging herself for it, simply to name it, worrying is happening. Then, to place her hand on her heart and say, this is a moment of suffering. May I be kind to myself in this moment? It sounds simple, doesn't it? Perhaps even too simple to matter. But within a few days, something shifted in Grandmother Lily's awareness. She began to see that the worrying was not who she was. It was simply something that was happening in her consciousness. She was not the worry. She was the awareness that could observe the worry arising and passing away. In her final weeks, something beautiful happened. Instead of being trapped by her anxious thoughts, Grandmother Lily began to relate to them with a kind of gentle curiosity. Oh, there's that familiar worry about my son's marriage, she would say, almost as if greeting an old, troublesome friend. And now here comes the anxiety about whether there's enough money for my funeral. But instead of being overwhelmed by these thoughts, she could observe them, acknowledge them, and let them pass through her consciousness like clouds moving across the sky. When Grandmother Lily died, she was peaceful. Not because she had eliminated all worry. Some of those old patterns were still there, right up to the end. But she had learned to relate to them differently. She had cultivated a quality of awareness that was larger and more spacious than any particular thought or emotion. This is what Buddhist teachings suggest we can all cultivate, regardless of our age or circumstances. A quality of consciousness that is not defined or limited by our habitual patterns of thinking and feeling. And this cultivation has profound implications for what we experience in death and beyond. Now, I want to share with you what my teacher revealed to me as he was dying, because it illuminates both the challenge and the opportunity that death presents according to Buddhist understanding. He told me that he was beginning to see how his entire life had been preparation for this moment. Not in the sense that life is merely a test we must pass, but in the sense that every experience, every choice, every moment of awareness had been shaping his consciousness, creating the very instrument through which he would experience whatever came next. The frightening thing, he said, is realizing how much creative power consciousness has, and how unconsciously we usually wield that power. In death, consciousness becomes like an artist with infinite materials, but without the usual boundaries and constraints. What kind of art will it create? That depends entirely on what kind of artist it has become. He went on to explain that in Buddhist understanding, death is not an ending, but a transition into what we call the bardo, an intermediate state where consciousness experiences itself, without the familiar anchor of physical embodiment. In this state, The mind creates its own reality according to its deepest patterns and tendencies. If consciousness has been cultivated in wisdom and compassion, if it has learned to rest in awareness itself rather than being carried away by every thought and emotion, then the bardo becomes an opportunity for liberation, a chance to recognize the true nature of mind and be free from the cycle of suffering that characterizes ordinary existence. But if consciousness remains trapped in patterns of fear, anger, attachment, or confusion, then the bardo becomes a kind of dream state where these patterns create their own reality and not necessarily a pleasant one. This is the frightening part, my teacher whispered. It's not that someone else judges us or punishes us. We become our own judges, our own jailers, or our own liberators. The question is, what have we been practicing? What patterns have we been strengthening? I could see that some of you might find this concerning. You might be thinking about your own patterns, your own struggles with difficult emotions or negative thinking. You might be wondering, what if I haven't been practicing the right things? What if it's too late? Please take a deep breath with me. Let me share something that may ease your heart. The beauty of Buddhist understanding is that it recognizes something fundamental about the nature of consciousness. At its deepest level, it is already whole, already free, already at peace. The difficult patterns we experience, anxiety, anger, sadness, confusion, these are like clouds in the sky. They arise, they move through awareness, and they pass away. But the sky itself remains clear and spacious. What we're practicing when we cultivate wisdom and compassion is not creating something new, but rather learning to recognize what has always been true about our deepest nature. We're learning to identify less with the clouds and more with the sky itself. This means that even if you've spent most of your life caught up in difficult patterns, even if you feel like you're just beginning to understand these things now, the essential work of liberation is available to you right now, in this very moment. Let me share with you a practice that can be profoundly helpful, especially for those of you who are concerned about what patterns you might be carrying into death. It's a practice that my teacher shared with me and that I've found transformative in my own life. Several times each day, take a moment to pause and ask yourself, what is here right now? Not what should be here, not what you wish were here, not what you're afraid might be here, but what is actually present in your awareness right now. You might notice physical sensations, perhaps the feeling of sitting in your chair, or the warmth or coolness of the air. You might notice sounds, birds singing, traffic passing, the hum of appliances. You might notice emotions, contentment, worry, curiosity, sadness. You might notice thoughts, memories arising, plans forming, judgments appearing. Here's the key. Whatever you notice, greet it with kindness. Not approval or disapproval, but simple, friendly acknowledgement. Oh, here is some anxiety about my health. Here is some grief about my friend who passed away. Here is some joy about my grandchild's laugh. Here is some confusion about what comes next. As you practice this gentle awareness, something remarkable begins to happen. You start to realize that you are not any of these individual experiences. You are the aware space in which they all arise and pass away. You are not the anxiety. You are the one who knows that anxiety is present. You are not the grief. You are the loving awareness that can hold grief with compassion. This recognition that you are the awareness itself, not the contents of awareness, is what Buddhist teachings point to as our true nature. And this true nature is not subject to death in the way we usually understand death. Now, I want to be very clear about something here. Buddhist teachings do not suggest that individual consciousness continues unchanged after death in the way that some other traditions describe eternal souls. The understanding is more subtle and perhaps more profound than that. According to Buddhist teaching, what we call self is actually a flowing river of experiences, held together by patterns of consciousness that we call karma. When the physical body dies, these patterns don't simply disappear. They continue to influence the flow of consciousness, creating new forms of experience. But here's where it gets both frightening and wonderful. These patterns are not fixed. They can be transformed through wisdom and compassion. And in the Bardo state after death, there are opportunities for profound transformation that may not be available during ordinary life. My teacher described to me how, in his final hours, he was beginning to perceive these opportunities. He said it was like being in a vast library where every book contained not just information, but living wisdom. Wisdom that could transform the very nature of consciousness itself. The frightening thing, he said, is that you can choose any book, but you will be drawn to the ones that resonate with the patterns you've cultivated. If you've spent your life in fear, you'll be drawn to books of fear. If you've cultivated compassion, you'll be drawn to books of love and wisdom. This is why the cultivation of wisdom and compassion during life is so important. Not because it earns us some external reward, but because it shapes the very instrument through which we experience whatever comes next. But even more than that, and this is crucial for those of you who might feel like you're late to this understanding, the cultivation of wisdom and compassion transforms our experience right now. It changes how we live, how we relate to others, how we face the challenges and joys of each day. Let me tell you about Robert, a man I met several years ago who came to our meditation group. He was 73 years old, recently widowed, and struggling with both grief and fear about his own mortality. "I've never been a spiritual person," he told me. "I don't know if I believe in any of this stuff about life after death, but I'm scared, and I don't know what else to try." Robert began coming to our weekly gatherings, not because he was convinced by Buddhist teachings, but simply because he was suffering and willing to try anything that might help. At first, he found meditation almost impossible. His mind was full of memories of his late wife, worries about his health, anger about getting old, fear about dying alone. But gradually, something began to shift. Robert started to recognize that his suffering was not primarily caused by his circumstances, losing his wife, aging, facing mortality, but by how his mind was relating to these circumstances. He was fighting against what had happened, desperately trying to hold on to what was gone, terrifying himself with imaginings about the future. Through the simple practice of observing his thoughts and feelings with kindness rather than judgment, Robert began to develop a different relationship with his own experience. He learned to sit with his grief without being overwhelmed by it. He learned to notice his fears about death without being terrorized by them. He learned to hold his memories of his wife with love rather than desperate clinging. The transformation in Robert was remarkable to witness. He didn't become someone different. He was still the same person, with the same dry sense of humor, the same strong opinions about politics, the same love for baseball and old movies. But his relationship with his own life had fundamentally shifted. "I'm still going to die," he told me one evening after meditation. "I still don't know exactly what happens then, but I'm not as afraid anymore. I've learned that I'm bigger than my fears, bigger than my sadness, bigger than all the things I can't control. And somehow, that makes everything bearable." What Robert discovered through practice is what Buddhist teachings have always maintained. Our essential nature is vast and spacious enough to hold whatever arises in our experience. When we identify with this spacious awareness rather than with the particular contents of our minds, we find a peace that doesn't depend on our circumstances being a certain way. This understanding has profound implications for how we approach death. If we've learned to rest in this spacious awareness during life, if we've practiced being present with whatever arises without being overwhelmed by it, then death becomes simply another experience that we can meet with openness and presence. But what if we haven't developed this capacity during life? What if death finds us still caught up in patterns of fear, anger, or confusion? This brings us to what my teacher called the most frightening aspect of Buddhist understanding about death, and also the most compassionate. The frightening aspect is that consciousness after death may continue to experience suffering based on the patterns it has cultivated. If we die in a state of fear, that fear may color our experience in the bardo. If we die with unresolved anger or attachment, these patterns may create their own reality in the intermediate state. This is not punishment imposed by some external authority. It's simply the natural consequence of how consciousness works. Just as a dreaming mind creates dream experiences based on the thoughts and feelings present when we fall asleep, consciousness in the bardo creates experiences based on the deepest patterns present at the time of death. But here's the compassionate aspect that makes this frightening truth ultimately liberating. These patterns are not permanent. Even in the bardo state, even after death, there are opportunities for recognition, for transformation, for liberation. Buddhist teachings describe how accomplished practitioners can appear in the bardo to guide consciousness toward wisdom and freedom. Some traditions speak of encountering enlightened beings who offer teachings and opportunities for awakening. Others describe how consciousness can recognize its own true nature and achieve liberation directly. But perhaps most importantly for those of us still living, Buddhist understanding emphasizes that the most effective preparation for death is the cultivation of wisdom and compassion right now, in this life, in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. This is not about becoming perfect or achieving some superhuman state of enlightenment. It's about developing a basic sanity and kindness in how we relate to our own experience. It's about learning to be present with what is, rather than constantly fighting against reality or trying to escape into fantasies about how things should be different. And here's something beautiful that I want to share with those of you who might feel like you're late to this understanding. Every moment offers a fresh start. Every breath is an opportunity to choose awareness over unconsciousness, kindness over harshness, presence over distraction. You don't need to spend years in a monastery or master complex philosophical teachings. The essential wisdom that prepares us for death is remarkably simple: learning to be here now with an open heart. Let me share with you a practice that can be profoundly transformative, especially for those approaching the later stages of life. It's something you can do anywhere, anytime, and it directly cultivates the quality of consciousness that serves us both in life and in death. Several times throughout your day, take just a moment to notice, I am aware, not I am aware of this or that particular thing, but simply the fact that awareness itself is present. Right now, as you listen to these words, there is awareness happening. Something in you knows that these words are being heard, that thoughts and feelings are arising and passing away, that you exist in this moment. This awareness, this knowing quality that is always present in your experience, this is what Buddhist teachings point to as your deepest nature. It's what was present when you were a child. It's what was present during all the major events of your adult life. And it's what is present now. This awareness doesn't age in the way your body ages. It doesn't become sick in the way your body becomes sick. And according to Buddhist understanding, it doesn't die in the way your body dies. When you practice recognizing this awareness throughout your day, you begin to identify less with the changing contents of your experience, your thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, memories, plans, and more with the unchanging awareness in which all these experiences arise and pass away. This shift in identification is perhaps the most important preparation we can make for death. When death comes, if we've learned to rest in awareness itself, rather than being caught up in the particular experiences of the body and mind, then the transition becomes far less frightening and far more natural. But even more than preparing us for death, this practice transforms our experience of life. When we identify with awareness itself, rather than with the constantly changing contents of awareness, we find a peace and stability that doesn't depend on our circumstances being any particular way. Let me tell you about Eleanor, a woman I met who exemplified this understanding beautifully. She was 86 years old when I first met her, living in a nursing home, dealing with significant health challenges, including the early stages of dementia. Her family was worried that she was losing herself as her memory became less reliable. But when I sat with Eleanor, I found someone who had learned to rest so deeply in present moment. Awareness that her diminishing memory had become almost irrelevant. She might not remember my name from week to week, or recall exactly what we had talked about the previous time I visited, but she was completely present, completely alive, completely herself in each moment we shared. "I don't worry so much about forgetting things anymore," she told me one afternoon. "I used to think I was my memories, my plans, all the thoughts in my head. But now I know I'm something more basic than all that. I'm the one who knows when something is forgotten, the one who knows when something is remembered. That part of me is just fine." Eleanor died peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning, and her daughter told me that in her final weeks, she had seemed to glow with a kind of inner light. "It was like she was already partway somewhere else," her daughter said, "somewhere beautiful and peaceful. She wasn't afraid at all. This is what becomes possible when we learn to rest in our deepest nature. Death becomes simply a natural transition rather than a catastrophic ending." Now, I want to address something that might be arising in your heart as you listen to this. Some of you might be thinking, "This all sounds beautiful, but what about my specific fears? What about my regrets? What about the people I'll leave behind?" These are not merely philosophical questions. They are the real, human concerns that naturally arise when we contemplate our own mortality. And Buddhist understanding has something profound to offer here as well. First, let's talk about regret. So many people approaching the later stages of life carry heavy burdens of regret. Things they did that they wish they hadn't done. Things they didn't do that they wish they had done. Ways they treated others that they now see were harmful. Opportunities they missed. Words they should have spoken but didn't. From a Buddhist perspective, regret can be either a form of suffering that binds us to the past, or it can be a doorway to wisdom and compassion. The difference lies in how we relate to the regret. If regret becomes a way of punishing ourselves, of staying stuck in self-condemnation, then it creates negative karma, patterns of consciousness that generate suffering. But if regret becomes a source of genuine remorse that motivates us toward greater wisdom and kindness, then it can actually be transformative. The key is learning to distinguish between what Buddhist teachers call genuine remorse and neurotic guilt. Neurotic guilt is self-attacking, repetitive, and ultimately self-indulgent. It keeps us focused on ourselves and our own suffering rather than on learning and growing. Genuine remorse, on the other hand, includes real acknowledgement of harm caused, but it moves us toward repair, forgiveness, and transformation. If you're carrying regrets from your past, consider this. Every moment of genuine remorse, every sincere wish that you had acted more wisely or kindly, every honest acknowledgement of mistakes, these create positive karma. They are expressions of the wisdom and compassion that exist within you, even if they weren't fully expressed in past situations. This doesn't erase the consequences of past actions, but it does mean that regret itself can become a teacher, a source of wisdom that transforms consciousness in positive ways. And here's something particularly important for those of you in the later stages of life. It's never too late to make amends. Even if the people you've harmed are no longer alive, even if the circumstances can never be repaired in the external world. The work of forgiveness, both giving and receiving forgiveness, is primarily internal work that can be done at any time. I remember a man named Frank who came to see me when he was 78 years old. He had been estranged from his son for more than 20 years, following a bitter argument that had escalated beyond all proportion. Frank's son had died 5 years earlier, and Frank was tormented by the knowledge that they would never be reconciled in this life. I keep thinking about what I'll say to him when I die, Frank told me. What if I see him again? What if he's still angry? What if he can't forgive me? I suggested to Frank that he practice a forgiveness meditation, speaking directly to his son's memory as if his son could hear him. At first, Frank was skeptical. What's the point if he's not really there to hear it? But Frank was desperate enough to try anything. So he began sitting quietly each morning and speaking from his heart to his deceased son. He apologized for his part in their estrangement. He expressed his love and his regrets. He forgave his son for the hurtful things that had been said. And gradually, he began to forgive himself. The transformation in Frank over the following months was remarkable. The weight of guilt and regret that had been crushing him began to lift. He found peace not because the external situation had changed. His son was still gone. The words between them could never be taken back, but because Frank's relationship to the situation had been transformed through genuine forgiveness. I don't know if my son can actually hear me, Frank told me near the end of our work together. But I know that something in me needed to say these things, needed to express this love and remorse. And now I feel like I can die in peace. This illustrates something profound about Buddhist understanding. The work of healing and transformation happens primarily in consciousness itself, not necessarily in external circumstances. When we cultivate forgiveness, compassion, and wisdom, we are literally transforming the quality of consciousness that will experience whatever comes next. Now let me address another common concern: worry about the people we'll leave behind. This is one of the most natural and loving concerns that arise as we face our own mortality. How will our spouses, children, grandchildren manage without us? Will they be okay? Have we prepared them adequately for life? This worry often comes from deep love, but it can also become a form of suffering that doesn't actually serve anyone. Buddhist teachings offer a different way to hold this concern. First, we can recognize that our loved ones, like ourselves, have their own karma, their own path of learning and growth. While we naturally want to protect them from suffering, we cannot live their lives for them or spare them from all difficulties. In fact, many of the challenges they will face, including the challenge of losing us, can become opportunities for their own growth in wisdom and strength. Second, we can ask ourselves, what is the most loving gift we can leave our loved ones? Is it our continued physical presence, which is ultimately impossible? Is it protection from all hardship, which is neither possible nor ultimately beneficial? Or is it something else? I would suggest that the most loving gift we can leave our loved ones is the example of how to live and die with grace, wisdom, and compassion. When they see us facing our own mortality with dignity rather than terror, with love rather than bitterness, with presence rather than denial, we teach them something invaluable about what it means to be human. Moreover, when we cultivate peace and wisdom in our own consciousness, we create what Buddhist teachings call merit, positive energy that naturally benefits all beings, including those we love most. Our own spiritual development is not selfish. It's one of the most generous things we can do for others. I think of Maria, a grandmother I knew who was diagnosed with terminal cancer at age 74. Her first reaction was intense worry about her grandchildren. "They're still so young," she said. "How will they understand? How will they cope without their abuela?" But as Maria worked with her diagnosis and began preparing for death, something beautiful happened. Instead of trying to hide her condition from her grandchildren or pretending everything was fine, she began talking with them honestly about dying, about love, about what really matters in life. She told them stories about their grandfather, who had died before they were born. She shared memories of her own childhood, of the hardships her family had overcome. She taught them simple meditation practices to help them when they felt scared or sad. Most importantly, she showed them through her own example that it was possible to face even death with love and courage. When Maria died, her grandchildren grieved deeply as was natural and healthy. But they had been given something precious. They had learned from their beloved grandmother that love is stronger than death, that presence is more important than duration, and that every ending is also a beginning. Abuela taught us that dying is just another part of loving. One of her grandchildren told me at the funeral. She's not really gone because the love is still here. This brings me to another aspect of Buddhist understanding about death that is both challenging and comforting. The recognition that the love we share with others is not dependent on physical presence. When someone we love dies, we often feel like we have lost them. But Buddhist teachings suggest a different understanding. We never actually possess other people, even when they're alive. What we have is the capacity to love, to appreciate, to connect. And this capacity doesn't die when the beloved person's body dies. The love you feel for your spouse, your children, your friends, this love is not located in their physical bodies. It's a quality of your own heart, your own consciousness. When they die, the love remains. In fact, often the love becomes purer, less complicated by the daily frustrations and conflicts that are part of any human relationship. This doesn't mean that grief is inappropriate or unnecessary. Grief is a natural expression of love, a way that the heart honors what has been precious to us. Buddhist teachings don't encourage us to suppress grief or pretend that loss doesn't matter. Instead, they invite us to grieve with awareness, to let the heart break open in love rather than closing in bitterness. When we understand death as a transition rather than an annihilation, when we recognize love as a quality of consciousness rather than a dependence on physical presence, then both our own dying and the death of our loved ones can be held in a larger context of meaning and continuity. But what about the moment of death itself? What does Buddhist teaching suggest about the actual experience of dying? This is often what people are most curious about and most afraid of. My teacher, in his final hours, described the beginning of the dying process as like gradually waking up from a very long dream. The dream of being this particular body, having this particular name, living in this particular time and place, he said. As the dream begins to fade, what remains is awareness itself, vast, open, luminous. He told me that the frightening part was not pain or loss, but the vastness of what was being revealed. When you've lived your whole life in a small room, he said, suddenly finding yourself in an infinite space can be overwhelming, even terrifying. The question is, have you cultivated the courage to embrace vastness, or will you desperately try to recreate the familiar walls of the small room? This metaphor captures something essential about Buddhist understanding of the death process. According to these teachings, consciousness at the moment of death begins to expand beyond the familiar boundaries of individual identity. The thoughts, memories, and sense of self that normally define our experience begin to dissolve, revealing something much larger and more fundamental. For consciousness that has been prepared through spiritual practice, this dissolution can be experienced as a return to our true nature, like a wave, recognizing that it was never separate from the ocean. But for consciousness that has not been prepared, that has spent a lifetime identifying completely with the small self and its concerns, this dissolution can feel like annihilation, creating panic and desperate attempts to maintain familiar patterns of identity. This is why Buddhist teachings emphasize the importance of meditation practice, not as an abstract spiritual exercise, but as direct preparation for the dying process. When we learn to let go of thoughts and rest in pure awareness during meditation, we are literally practicing for death. We are becoming familiar with consciousness without the usual props of identity, memory, and mental activity. But please understand, this is not about becoming some kind of advanced spiritual practitioner. This is about something much more basic and accessible, learning to find peace in simplicity, learning to rest in the present moment without needing everything to be different than it is. Every time you sit quietly and simply observe your breath moving in and out, you are practicing this fundamental letting go. Every time you watch thoughts arise in your mind without being carried away by them, you are preparing for the dissolution that happens at death. Every time you rest in the simple awareness of being alive in this moment, you are touching the deathless quality of consciousness itself. And here's something particularly meaningful for those of you who may be dealing with physical limitations, health challenges, or the natural diminishments that come with aging. These experiences can actually become powerful spiritual teachers if we approach them with the right understanding. When the body becomes less reliable, when energy decreases, when some of our familiar capacities are no longer available, we are being invited to discover what remains constant. We are being asked to find out what doesn't depend on the body being young and strong and healthy. I think of James, a man I worked with who had developed Parkinson's disease in his mid-70s. At first, he was devastated by the changes in his body, the tremors, the difficulty with movement, the way his handwriting became illegible. "I feel like I'm disappearing," he told me. But as James learned to work with his condition mindfully, something unexpected happened. He began to discover aspects of himself that had nothing to do with physical capacity. His sense of humor remained intact. His ability to love his family was undiminished. His capacity for wisdom and insight actually seemed to deepen as he was forced to slow down and pay closer attention to each moment. In some strange way, James told me several years after his diagnosis, "This disease has been a teacher. It's shown me what I really am underneath all the things I thought I was. I'm not my strong body. That was never really mine anyway, just something I got to borrow for a while. I'm not my ability to write clearly or move gracefully. I'm something much more basic than all of that. I'm the awareness that knows when the body is shaking, that knows when movement is difficult. And that awareness is perfectly fine, completely unaffected by any of this." This recognition that James came to, that we are the awareness observing our experience rather than the contents of that experience. This is one of the most profound insights that Buddhist teachings offer about the nature of death. When we die, according to Buddhist understanding, the body stops functioning, but the awareness that has been observing the body throughout life doesn't simply vanish. It continues, but without the familiar anchor of physical sensation and the usual boundaries of individual identity. This is where the preparation we do during life becomes crucial. If we've learned to identify with awareness itself, rather than with the changing contents of awareness, then death becomes simply a continuation of this expanded identification. But if we remain identified primarily with the body, with our thoughts, with our individual story, then death can feel like a catastrophic loss of everything we take ourselves to be. Now, I want to share with you something that my teacher revealed to me about what Buddhist teachings call the clear light of death, the moment when consciousness is most fully revealed in its essential nature. According to traditional Buddhist texts, there is a moment in the dying process when all the usual mental activity ceases, when the gross levels of consciousness dissolve, and what remains is pure awareness itself, clear, luminous, and vast beyond all conception. This moment is described as an opportunity for immediate liberation, a chance to recognize our true nature and be free from the cycle of death and rebirth altogether. But here's what my teacher found both frightening and wonderful about this teaching. Most of us, he said, are so unfamiliar with this state of pure awareness that when it arises, we don't recognize it. Instead of embracing it as our true nature, we panic and try to recreate familiar patterns of mental activity. It's like someone who has lived their whole life in a noisy city, suddenly finding themselves in perfect silence. Instead of enjoying the peace, they become anxious and start making noise just to feel normal again. The tragedy, my teacher told me, is not that we are punished for failing to recognize this clear light. The tragedy is that we punish ourselves by rejecting our own deepest nature out of unfamiliarity and fear. But he also shared something hopeful. Even if we miss this opportunity for immediate liberation at the moment of death, consciousness continues to have opportunities for awakening throughout the bardo experience. And even if liberation is not achieved in the bardo, the patterns of wisdom and compassion cultivated during life continue to influence whatever form of existence follows. This is why Buddhist teachings emphasize that it's never too late to begin cultivating positive qualities of mind. Every moment of genuine kindness, every instant of real presence, every expression of wisdom or compassion creates positive imprints in consciousness that will continue to bear fruit. But I want to bring this back to something practical and immediate. What does this mean for how you live your life right now, today, whatever your circumstances may be? It means that every ordinary moment is actually extraordinary. Every breath you take, every act of kindness you offer, every moment of peace you allow yourself, these are not just pleasant experiences that make life more enjoyable. They are actually shaping the very quality of consciousness that will experience whatever comes next. When you sit with your morning coffee and really taste it, really appreciate the warmth and flavor and the simple pleasure of being alive, you are cultivating presence. When you speak kindly to someone who is being difficult, you are cultivating compassion. When you notice worry arising in your mind and choose not to be carried away by it, you are cultivating wisdom. These small acts of consciousness training are not separate from preparing for death. They are the preparation for death. And they are also what makes life meaningful and beautiful right now. I want to share with you a story that illustrates this beautifully. There was an elderly woman named Ruth who lived in my neighborhood when I first came to America. She was 92 years old, living alone in a small apartment, dealing with various health issues that made even simple tasks challenging. Most people would have described Ruth's circumstances as rather sad, isolated, struggling, approaching the end of a difficult life. But Ruth had discovered something that made her one of the most radiant people I've ever known. She had learned to find profound meaning and joy in the smallest experiences. When I would visit her, she would tell me about the way the light came through her window in the morning, about the pleasure she found in slowly eating a piece of fruit, about the satisfaction of completing a crossword puzzle, about the love she felt when her nephew called on the phone. People think my life is hard now, Ruth told me once. But in some ways, it's the most beautiful it's ever been. I don't have any big adventures anymore, but I have something better. I have attention. I notice things now that I was too busy to see when I was younger. Every little thing seems precious when you really pay attention to it. Ruth died peacefully in her sleep on a winter night, and her nephew told me that in her final weeks, she had seemed to glow with contentment. She wasn't denying that death was approaching. She spoke about it openly and without fear. But she was so deeply rooted in appreciation for whatever was present in each moment that death felt simply like the next natural step in her journey. Aunt Ruth taught me that happiness isn't about what happens to you, her nephew told me. It's about how present you are with whatever is happening. She was the happiest person I knew, right up to the end. This is what becomes possible when we understand life and death as Buddhist teachings present them, not as a problem to be solved or a test to be passed, but as an opportunity to discover the deepest truths about consciousness, love, and what it really means to be alive. As we near the end of our time together today, I want to offer you a practice that can serve as both a daily meditation and a preparation for death. It's something you can do anywhere, anytime, and it directly cultivates the quality of awareness that serves us both in life and in whatever comes after. Simply notice that you are aware. Right now, in this moment, there is awareness happening. You are aware of these words, aware of your own presence, aware of being alive. This awareness is not produced by thinking. It's what allows thinking to be known. It's not dependent on the body being young or healthy. It's what knows when the body is comfortable or uncomfortable. It's not created by circumstances being a certain way. It's what remains constant through all changing circumstances. Rest in this awareness. not as something you have to create or maintain, but as something that is already here, already complete, already at peace. This awareness is your deepest nature. It was present when you were a child. It's present now in your later years. And according to Buddhist understanding, it continues beyond the death of the body. When you practice resting in this awareness throughout your daily life, you are doing the most important preparation possible for death. You are becoming familiar with the aspect of yourself that is already deathless, already free, already at peace. And here's the beautiful thing. This practice doesn't require you to become someone different than who you are. It doesn't require you to adopt new beliefs or join any particular religion. It simply requires you to recognize what is already most true about your own experience, that you are aware, that you are alive, that you exist. As my teacher said in his final words to me, the frightening truth about death is how much freedom we have, how much creative power consciousness possesses. But the liberating truth is exactly the same. We have the freedom to choose what kind of consciousness we cultivate, what kind of reality we create through our awareness and intention. This choice is available to you right now. Not tomorrow, not when circumstances are different, not when you feel more prepared right now. Every moment offers the opportunity to choose awareness over distraction, kindness over harshness, presence over absence, love over fear. Whatever your age, whatever your circumstances, whatever patterns you may have developed over the decades, the fundamental capacity for wisdom, compassion, and peace exists within you right now. It has always existed within you. It is your birthright, your deepest nature, your true inheritance. The Buddhist understanding of death and what follows is ultimately an invitation to fully embrace life. Not life as we think it should be, but life as it actually is in this moment. When we can meet our present experience with complete openness, when we can rest in awareness itself, rather than being carried away by the contents of awareness, then we discover something that is not subject to birth or death, gain or loss, success or failure. My dear friends, as we close our time together, I invite you to feel the profound gift of being alive right now. Feel the breath moving in and out of your body. Notice the awareness that is reading these words. Appreciate the miracle of consciousness itself, this mysterious capacity to know, to love, to be present. This awareness that you are is not separate from the awareness that I am, or that any being is. At the deepest level, we are all expressions of the same fundamental consciousness, the same Buddha nature, as the teachings call it. When you cultivate peace and wisdom in your own awareness, you are contributing to the peace and wisdom of all existence. And when your time comes to die, whether that is in many years or in the nearer future, you can meet that transition not as a defeat or a tragedy, but as a natural completion of this particular expression of consciousness. Just as a wave eventually returns to the ocean without losing its essential nature as water, consciousness at death returns to its source without losing its essential nature as awareness itself. The frightening truth that my teacher shared with me was not that death is terrible, but that it reveals the awesome responsibility and power we have as conscious beings. We are, quite literally, creating our experience through the quality of awareness we bring to each moment. This is true in life, and it remains true in death and whatever follows. But this frightening truth is also a liberating truth. If we are creating our experience, then we have the power to create it with wisdom rather than ignorance, with love rather than fear, with presence rather than distraction. This power is yours right now. This freedom is available in this very moment. The same awareness that will navigate whatever comes after death is the awareness that is present as you listen to these words. It is vast enough to hold all your fears, all your sorrows, all your joys, all your hopes. It is strong enough to carry you through whatever challenges remain in your life and whatever mysteries lie beyond. Rest in this awareness. Trust in this awareness. Live from this awareness. And when the time comes, die from this awareness. This is the deepest teaching that Buddhism offers about death and what lies beyond. Not a doctrine to believe, but a reality to discover. Not a philosophy to study, but a truth to embody. May you find in these teachings not just comfort, but genuine wisdom. May you discover in your own awareness the peace that surpasses all understanding. And may you live each remaining day of your precious life with the full recognition of who and what you truly are. Infinite consciousness expressing itself through the beautiful temporary form of this human existence. Thank you for sharing this time with me, for opening your hearts to these reflections, for being willing to explore the deepest questions that human beings can ask. The Buddha taught that all beings have the capacity for awakening, for liberation, for the discovery of perfect peace. This capacity exists within you right now, as present and available as your next breath. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free from suffering. And may all beings awaken to the deathless truth of their own deepest nature. In gratitude and with boundless compassion, I offer these words to you, trusting that they will serve whatever is most true and beneficial in your journey through life and beyond.